corpses up like it was Judgment Day.
Manhunt is one of Rockstar's most overlooked titles. It's Rockstar at its most primitive and dark. During its launch and years after, it was more known for its controversy of its graphic violence compared to the gameplay. Which is too bad, as it shows what Rockstar can be capable of when you strip away the open world elements that they're known for. It uses a simple but effective stealth system that's a wonderful blending of vision and sound to navigate and get the drop on your enemies. Its execution system is gruesome and brutal, with a risk-reward structure that uses simple incentives to push you to go for that more indulgent execution. While it overplays its hand during the last stretch, its cover-based gun combat was a bit ahead of its time before cover shooters were everywhere. Manhunt is one of the darkest, bleakest, most engrossing atmospheres I have ever come across in a game. Its sparse story leaves a lot of blanks for the players to fill in themselves. And while this era of Rockstar using top-name talent to voice roles had a bit of a mixed bag, Manhunt contains the best use of it. A role that's key to fleshing out Manhunt, with one of the best voice performances I've heard in a game.
Okay, are you ready? Camera, action.
If you've never checked out Manhunt before, it comes as a very high recommendation from me, whether you're a fan of Rockstar games, stealth games, or games swimming in atmosphere. If you're going to play on PC, there is some tweaking you need to do to get it running smoothly on modern systems. I'll provide a link in the description, it's very quick to set up. Despite all the controversy over the title, just like Rockstar faced with GTA 3 and Vice City the 2 years prior, Manhunt didn't end up selling so well. Its first month, it only sold about 75,000 copies. Compare that to Vice City. The year prior, it sold 1.4 million copies in 2 days, making it the fastest selling game in history at that time. Rockstar had been under fire the last couple years since the release of Grand Theft Auto 3 in regards to violence in video games. It's around this time frame that then attorney Jack Thompson began to be known in the media for going after game companies. Rockstar was his main target, starting with Grand Theft Auto 3. It would be more his focus on Manhunt 2 and Grand Theft Auto 4 that he's known for. Going after Manhunt 2 is something I'll cover for another day. However, there's plenty of controversy internally at Rockstar over the game. Here's what former Rockstar employee Jeff Williams had to say about Manhunt. It may sound surprising, but there was almost a mutiny at the company over that game. It was Rockstar's North pet project. Most of us at Rockstar Games wanted no part of it. We'd already weathered plenty of controversy over GTA 3 and Vice City. We were no strangers to it. But Manhunt felt different. With GTA, we always had the excuse that the gameplay was untethered. You never had to hurt anybody that wasn't a bad guy in one of the missions. You could play completely ethically if you wanted, and the game was parody anyways, so lighten up. Manhunt, though, just made us all feel icky. It was all around the violence, and it was realistic violence. We all knew there was no way we could explain away that game. There was no way to rationalize it. We were crossing a line. So let's take a look at these lines that Manhunt crossed. Our goal in Manhunt is to make our way through these areas full of gangs and take them down, as everything is being filmed for a snuff film. The director, Starkweather, gives us orders through our earpiece. You could deal with enemies straight up in a fight, but that's not the best choice for a number of reasons. Combat system is simple but awkward. You're pretty much screwed if you're going to take on more than one enemy at a time. So your best bet is making use of the execution system. This is where the brutality of Manhunt shows up. Sneak up behind an enemy and Cash will switch his stance, indicating you could do an execution. Early on in the game, the director will also chime in to let us know that we're in range.
Liquidate.
You have 3 levels of execution. The longer you hold, you can move up to the next level of execution. These executions are far more brutal, the ones that the game got in trouble for. Not that the lower level executions aren't brutal themselves. You're given a number of weapons throughout the game for these executions, so there's quite a variety to see. Things get more cinematic when an execution occurs. These executions are all instant kills. So what's the incentive to go for the higher execution in Manhunt? Well, besides being treated to a more brutal takedown, you also get a boost in the score at the end of the level and higher praise from the director. One of the aspects that makes Manhunt unique and so extraordinary is the director watching us, Starkweather. A vocal presence throughout most of the game. The better you do, the more pleased he is. Or if you screw up, he'll chastise you.
Beautiful. You're warming up our audience nicely. You're stacking those corpses up like it was Judgment Day. You're at it again. Taste me, just like a teenage girl.
He's one sick puppy. The game could have been greatly hindered if the writing and the voice acting wasn't up to par. Thankfully, that isn't the case. This is one sick man here we're dealing with. But it's not like he's hiding it. This is from the period when Rockstar was going for big name talent for voice acting roles. Something they would eventually move away from. Here it's Brian Cox as the director, and I can't imagine anyone else doing this role. He brings his A game here, so many of these lines could have gone horribly wrong without the right direction, writing, and voice talent, but it's knocked out of the park here.
Pathetic rat! You're making this look too easy. Cut these guys some slack, for Christ's sake.
Speaking of Brian Cox and Manhunt, Oh, there's my awkward transition. Yeah, he played Dr. Hannibal Lecter in the excellent Michael Mann film Manhunter. This movie was a few years prior to Silence of the Lambs. While most think of Anthony Hopkins or Mads Mikkelsen when it comes to Dr. Hannibal Lecter, don't sleep on his take on the character. It's a great film. Rockstar Games wears the Michael Mann influence on their sleeves in their other titles, and a bit here as well. I can't help but wonder for the role if they got him because he was also in a movie called Manhunter. For one example, there's this one line he gives every once in a while where he seems a bit too pleased by what you do.
Oh my God, I've had an accident. I'm serious, man. You brought me off.
It's a humorous line, but with just how sick it is, I wouldn't be surprised if Starkweather was doing this while watching us take out these gangs. There is a risk reward for going for the higher executions. You risk someone seeing you, the individual you're after might turn around. It's great tension. It's a simple system, but it's rewarding one with the right incentives. Nothing with these executions feels graceful. It's utterly brutal. These aren't picturesque kills. They're a struggle. A graceful dance this is not. It's brutal and ugly and works wonderfully for what the game goes for. Most of your time, however, Manhunt will be lurking amongst the shadows, waiting to get the drop on these gangs. Manhunt makes use of a simple but efficient stealth system. By no means deep, this isn't Thief by any stretch, but works well for what the game's going for. It makes use of a radar instead of a minimap. It shows how much sound you make, the placement and directions that enemies are facing, their caution level. So for caution level, it's yellow is idle, orange is cautious, red is when they're aware. It's a bit odd. Why didn't they just go with green, yellow, red? It's not like the game is built around the radar, something that future Rockstar games would fall victim to, where you get far more information from just staring at the minimap in the corner. Enemies don't appear on your radar unless they're making noises within range, like talking, whistling, footsteps. If you're playing on the hardcore difficulty, there is no radar. The game is playable without it, especially if you get EAX running for it on the PC version where you have positional audio. It's a great combination of vision and stealth that I wish more games would make use of. Now it's all about detective visions or giving everything away on your minimap. For making noises, you have several options, such as hitting a wall to make noise or chucking objects to get their attention. One that's really fucked up is when you use certain weapon executions, as they will remove the head of the enemy. At this point, you could toss the head to not only create a noise distraction, but to fuck with them.
Prepare yourself for hell! Don't like the looks of this. War dogs!
On the console version, which I'm not playing here, you could also use a headset to make noises to distract enemies. One of those cool little features that you don't exactly see developers do anymore. Also note that the game controls quite well. Rockstar titles have always had they've always felt a bit loose, especially during this era of their games. But here, even all these years later, it plays quite well. There were a few times where I'd be in reach of an execution, the stance would change, and then the enemy would move just out of it, and I end up hitting them with a simple swing instead of going for an execution, leading to a chase. There are spots of darkness where you could hide, and it's like Splinter Cell or Thief. Depending on your brightness setting, it may be a bit amusing that enemies can't see you, but you learn to deal with it. A little bit of suspension of disbelief. Sometimes enemies will venture in, but mostly they will stay in the fringes if they're searching for you. Of course, if you're spotted, they'll still know you're there if they see you running into the darkness. Some of the best, most frantic moments arise in Manhunt when you get caught, and it's up to you with what you want to do with it. It's here that you'll want to run, find some shadow that they don't see you entering, and then making your next move as necessary. On the note of dashing, it's nice that Cash can run further than 3 feet before getting winded. You can actually go quite a fair distance. What's also great about these portions is the enemy dialogue. In the last video I covered, Max Payne has some of my favorite goon dialogue. Manhunt is right up there when they're searching for you. The number of gangs you come across, there's quite a range of dialogue to be thrown your way. To hear the best of them, you're going to have to get caught and make your way back into the shadows.
Boys! Make way, boys. Daddy's here.
Hidey hole in there. Run, doggy. Run, dog. Woo! Woo! Damn chicken shit hiding in the goddamn bra!
As well, they do this aw shucks he got away foot stomp when they give up searching for you. That cracks me up every time.
Just stand still for 5 goddamn minutes, why don't you? Lost him.
Manhunt came out of that era of the early to mid 2000s where games had some of the best atmospheres around. I've covered a number of them on my channel, like Bloodlines, Condemned, Stalker, and Manhunt is right up there. Like the other Rockstar games of its era, prior to the Rage engine in 2006 with Table Tennis, Manhunt makes use of the Renderware engine, something that they got plenty of mileage out of. Game still looks great, it's slightly upscaled here with its dark, dingy industrial style. The soundtrack, done by Rockstar veteran Craig Connor, is incredible. It's very John Carpenter in a way, and helps to build that dreadful atmosphere that encompasses Manhunt. When it comes to the horror here in Manhunt, it's all about the horrors of man. It's very primitive when it comes to its horror, and there's still nothing really quite like it. And while you yourself are quite the hunter, it doesn't take much for the tables to turn on you. Before you know it, if you get caught, you'll have swarms of enemies coming your way as you try to regain your balance and try again. It's this push and pull gameplay that works very well with Manhunt. Now the thing is, unless this is a very short game, Manhunt would need a bit more than what's here to flesh out the experience. Instead of adding more elements to the stealth system, there is a gunplay system at work here too. A gunplay system where Manhunt was a bit ahead of a curve. Manhunt makes use of a cover system. This is about 3 years ahead of Gears of War, which really helped usher in the cover system in games. Everyone here dies incredibly quickly, including Cash. It's a very basic cover system, but due to the high damage on both ends, there's high stakes involved. Once in short bursts, the gun combat system works quite well. It's used as a bit of a palate cleanser in between sections where executions remain king. There are some sections later on where you could use a mixture of the two. And then eventually the last stretch of the game is more or less gun encounters, which does lead to a bit of a quality drop. But now let's go through some of the highlights of Manhunt. So from here on in, there are some spoilers involved. There's a quick intro here about journalists looking into exposing Starkweather. Our protagonist, James Earl Cash, is on death row. What he's on death row for is up to you to decide. But seeing how calm he is when killing people, it's probably a safe guess he's had his share of killing prior to his execution. However, this is a ruse. He was sedated and will now be the star of a film by this director guiding us. From here, we make our way through the streets to clear out these gangs. One thing I should know about the writing in Manhunt is that Dan Houser had no involvement in the writing. Save for the Manhunt titles and the Warriors, Dan Houser had a major part of every writing team for any Rockstar game. And while his work is great, I did find some of the later Rockstar games quite bloated with their scripts. Manhunt here instead is very minimal with its approach, and it's all the better for it. There's something about letting the player fill in the blanks that leads to a very unsettling atmosphere. Going overboard and explaining everything would have greatly taken away from it. Not that I'm saying it would have had Dan been involved with the project, but I'm sure there would have been more writing. Manhunt is always ramping things up, adding new challenges or twists, additional objectives to have in mind, and switches up the gangs as you go through the streets to keep things fresh. The first few levels serve as the main tutorial. The Hoods are the first gang here, giving us a feel for things. Every few levels, the director's thugs will come pick us up and drop us off elsewhere. Here we get introduced to new gangs, new weapons, new challenges. Gangs will have their own weapons, some tweaks to the AI, such as being more in groups, which makes hunting from the shadows more challenging. As well, they have new dialogue to keep things fresh.
I know you're here. I can smell the filthy mess in your pants.
Once we're in the skins territory, does the game really find its groove, as the training wheels have mostly come off. It's here that we get access to weapons that could take enemies' heads off during executions. It's a great way to distract enemies and fuck with them by chucking a head their way. Plus, compared to the previous gang, the skins have a lot more character to them with their dialogue.
It's like trying to find a monkey in a whorehouse.
We get access to the nail gun here, and to be honest, I think they should have just cut it from the game and waited for the guns to be added and go from there. It's so brief that we have access to them, and they're not really needed. The stealth, up close and personal approach still works just fine here. There's a couple of times during the skin section where we have this completely unnecessary crane minigame. Take down the number of skins that surround you while you try to awkwardly hit them by flinging something like a fridge into them. The crane serves as a bullet sponge. It's one of those things that I wish they cut and put more focus into the stealth system. Another gang switch has us dealing with the war dogs. But before that, we get this very interesting, unsettling scene.
This guy fucking stinks. Just give him a fucking food and let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah, you know we're going to come across him later. In a game full of many unsettling things, Pig Z is arguably the most unsettling. For another brutal head removal, we now have access to a machete. Like all the executions, it's not cinematic by any stretch. There is one level here where a few members of Cash's family are tied up that we have to set free. And something that took me back, Cash speaks to them.
Trust no one. Now go!
He hasn't spoken all game. This did take me aback because I thought they were going with the silent protagonist approach like they did with Grand Theft Auto 3. To be honest, I wish they did keep it that way. He doesn't speak a ton as is, but I found his voice acting in a game full of fantastic voice acting leaves a lot to be desired.
Good. Take it and get out of town.
But you're not coming with me?
I'm going to deal with Starkweather personally. Thank him for my second chance. You're my backup if I don't make it. Have a nice life.
The next stretch has us dealing with the Innocence Gang.
Shit. He ain't sliding, he slid.
From here, we're given access to guns, and a level that's all about taking cover and shooting. Now, I was concerned that from here on in, guns would be the main focus, and that wasn't the case. At least not yet. Manhunt for the next little bit weaves in and out in regards to offering us guns for some levels before taking them away for the next. Another hurdle gets tossed our way in which we have to escort a bum through one of the levels. Here, red flags start to go off for me since this was an escort mission.
Make your mind up, buddy!
Turns out it's relatively pain-free. You can just tell him to wait a ways back with no consequences, clear out the area you had, and then go back to get him. It's to the extent where it's like, well, what was the point of this? Since you could just keep him further back without any consequences, it's like, why even bother putting this in at all? It just adds unnecessary padding. It really wasn't needed. However, the last stretch of this level, it reintroduces guns in an area I found frustrating due to the checkpoint placement. So throughout Manhunt, you could pick up videotapes that serve as checkpoints. Up until now, I didn't really have any issues with checkpoint placement. They had that right balance of being spread out far enough that there is relief when you come across one. It's when guns come into play that they become a bit more frustrating. This is due to how much quicker you go down as a result when you're dealing with enemies with guns. We're then taken to the penitentiary to deal with the Smiles gang.
The prison's modern facilities include spacious cells for the inmates. The exceptionally well-staffed hospital is equipped for emergencies, as well as routine health checks. Adjacent to row 1, the electric chair room, is where death sentences are carried out.
The lunatics have taken over the asylum, Cash. The only way to reason with these gibbering idiots is with a stick and a gun.
A game full of incredible atmosphere, this is where Manhunt is at its very best atmosphere-wise. It's here where Manhunt gets the right balance with the well-designed areas that give you the option to do a mixture of the two approaches. It's here where Director Starkweather wants to wrap up things and kill Cash, by sending a tiny little force after us. Come on, you'd think he would send a bigger force to deal with us, all things considered, how much we've already been through, how many people we've already killed. And it's here where Manhunt turns from a mostly phenomenal experience to one full of trial and error with frustrations. Manhunt loses its footing. We no longer have the director in our ear, which is a bummer. The gangs are now more or less gone. Now it's cops, SWAT teams, and Starkweather's goons. The barking dialogue they do is nowhere as good. Executions and stealth are mostly pushed to the sidelines. Instead, it's replaced with gunplay for the rest of the way in. Checkpoints here become a case of frustration. It's here where I wish Manhunt had a few more layers to the stealth system, that they could have made use of it right to the very end, instead of going with the mostly gun-focused approach here on in. We do meet with the journalist from the beginning, and while it's great that she has the evidence to help us take down Starkweather and his operation, she seems less focused on that instead of using this as a way to advance her career. There is a very brief escort section with her, and unlike the one with the bum, she'll get scared and try to find you if you leave her too far behind for a period of time. Because it ends up being such a non-factor, doing something like this to the bum section could have had more of a challenge. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it would become a case of frustration, because that stretch of escorting him is quite long. Here, the stretch of escorting her is extremely short, so there's not really any frustration with it. The stretch here of getting to the subway station and the subway station itself is the most frustrating stretch in Manhunt. Most games tend to have that section. Rockstar games, especially the GTA ones, always have some notorious missions. Well, this is the case here in Manhunt. The sheer number of SWAT team members you have to deal with, along with these spread out checkpoints with guns are here, making things a very tricky trial and error affair. And I finally completed this after many, many tries. It was less relief and more of a thank fuck that section is over. Not that Starkweather's manor is a walk in the park. There's still plenty of trial and error here in regards to getting into his mansion with the number of goons amongst the place. But there is far more darkness to hide in than prior. That said, enemies aren't afraid to shoot into the dark if they think you're there, so it's no guarantee that you're safe. And with those various scenes we see with Pigsy, you know it's coming. We finally come across him in a boss fight. Pigsy here is a terrifying presence here with his chainsaw coming after us. We have to explore this area to find weapons for executions, which takes a few to take him down. It works very well with the gameplay system. With that, we get access to his chainsaw, take out the last of Starkweather's guard, and deal with the man himself. It is incredibly satisfying to finally take him down.
Cash, I made you!
This ending, things wrap up rather nicely. However, for whatever reason, there was something that should have been in the ending, but wasn't. There's this audio file on the Manhunt website with the journalist, who's now in a mental hospital dealing with the aftermath. suffering from PTSD and paranoia from what she had witnessed. This goes much better with the tone of what the game was going for. It would have been a great addition to have after the main ending. I'll include a link in the description if you want to go listen to it. Overall, if you cut pretty much everything in between the end of the penitentiary and the beginning of Starkweather's Manor, the game would have been better off for it. It is a bit of a bummer that the team did get a bit too reliant on guns during the last stretch of Manhunt. Perhaps after having hours upon hours of content in their open world titles, they were concerned that having a shorter, linear experience would disappoint customers and padded out Manhunt a bit. It's not like the gun sections in Manhunt are terrible by any stretch, but they are a noticeable step down in quality of what came before. But hey, when I look at some of my favorite games, that happens on the regular. Although released all the way back in 2003, I haven't played many games like Manhunt since. Few have come close to having such a dark and brutal tone, and while Rockstar would take another crack at it with Manhunt 2, most of their work has strayed away from such a dark focus. Violence? Sure. Satire? Plenty. But games as dark as Manhunt? You really don't see them to this extent. It has that Rockstar touch, that je ne sais quoi factor that their games have. However, it strips out all the open world elements and has a narrow scope and focus. It's one of those series that we won't get again. I don't foresee a modern Rockstar making a Manhunt 3. Besides, those GTA Shark cash cards make way too much money for them, and key players like Leslie Benzie and Dan Houser are gone from the company. So whether you're a Rockstar fan into stealth titles or love games that hit a home run in regards to its atmosphere, you owe it to yourself to check out Manhunt. Start stacking those corpses like it was Judgment Day.
I've had an accident. I'm serious, man. You brought me off.